For Beatrice Sterling, a woman whose name was etched onto the foundations of New York City's most formidable skyscrapers, everything in the world had a ledger entry. Her life was a meticulously curated collection of assets, from sprawling estates in the Hamptons to controlling interests in global conglomerates. But tonight, in the gilded silence of Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive it felt less like a place to eat and more like a museum of culinary ambition, her gaze locked onto a strange, tarnished object hanging from a leather cord around a young waitress's neck. In that single, heart-stopping moment, the 82 years of fortified composure, of calculated decisions and managed emotions, threatened to collapse into a ruin of memory and regret she had spent more than half a century cementing over. What was it about this worthless-looking trinket that could send a tremor through the unshakable foundation of one of the world's most powerful women? The answer, buried 60 years deep, was a story of cosmic love, brutal sacrifice, and a secret worth more than all the gold in her vaults. Beatrice moved through her world with the quiet, gravitational pull of a celestial body. Her posture, honed by decades of discipline, was ramrod straight. Her hair, a helmet of perfectly coiffed silver, framed a face that had seen empires rise and fall, a face that betrayed nothing. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed no detail. She was dining at Aurelia for no reason other than it was a Wednesday. Anniversaries were daggers of memory, birthdays, hollow echoes. Wednesdays were blessedly, beautifully blank. Her companion was her son, Arthur Sterling, the 45-year-old CEO of Sterling Industries. The behemoth corporation her late husband, Edward, had inherited and quadrupled. Arthur was a carbon copy of his father in ambition, but not in spirit. He was sharp, relentless, and wore a suit that seemed less tailored and more surgically attached. He spoke of hostile takeovers and emerging markets, his words a familiar, anesthetic drone that Beatrice had long ago perfected the art of filtering. "The board is in agreement. The Kennertech acquisition is vital for our Q4 projections," Arthur stated, his eyes fixed on a tablet displaying fluctuating green and red lines. "It's a strategic necessity, Mother. Are you even listening?" Beatrice offered a ghost of a smile, her gaze sweeping over the room. Light from crystal fixtures cascaded onto tables set with military precision. The hushed clinking of silverware and the murmur of conversation were a carefully orchestrated symphony of privilege. It was all so flawless, so controlled, so suffocatingly lonely. Edward had been gone for 15 years, and with his passing, the vibrant colors of her life had desaturated into shades of gray and beige. Her existence was a gilded cage, magnificent to behold from the outside, but cold and barren within. A young waitress approached their table, her movements economical and efficient, betraying a deep-seated exhaustion. Her uniform was crisp, but a careful eye could see the subtle fraying at the cuffs, the ghost of a coffee stain on the apron. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple, severe ponytail. She was, in every objective sense, unremarkable, another face in the endless procession of service staff that populated Beatrice's life. "Can I get you anything else, Mr. Sterling? Mrs. Sterling?" the waitress asked, her voice a soft but clear melody against the room's ambient hum. Arthur waved a dismissive hand, already absorbed in another data stream on his device. But Beatrice's attention was not on the young woman's face. It was fixed on her neck. Peeking out from the V of her uniform collar was a cheap leather cord. But the object hanging from it was what made the air in Beatrice's lungs turn to ice. It was not a locket. It was a small, spherical object, no larger than a silver dollar, crafted from a dark, tarnished metal that looked like pewter or old silver. It was intricately carved with celestial patterns, constellations and planetary orbits. A series of tiny concentric dials were set into its face, centered around a small, dull piece of quartz that resembled a star. It looked like an antique astrolabe, a mariner's compass, or some kind of strange, arcane puzzle box. Time did not stop. It fractured. The polite murmur of the restaurant warped into a discordant roar in Beatrice's ears. Her heart began a painful, hammering tattoo against her ribs. It couldn't be. Not after all these years. Not here. Not now. There might be a million trinkets in the world, but there was only one of these. She knew every etched line, every tiny imperfect gear she could feel but not see. She knew the impossible weight of it, a weight that was both physical and metaphysical. She had held it in her hands only once, 60 years ago. "Mother, what is it? You've gone completely white," Arthur said, his concern finally piercing his corporate armor. Beatrice didn't hear him. Her vision narrowed, a pinprick of focus on that one impossible object. A dam of memories, 60 years old and built of sheer willpower, finally broke. A summer sky filled with Perseids, the smell of old paper and cedar wood, the thrilling weight of a love so profound it felt like a law of physics, and the gut-wrenching, soul-cleaving agony of a choice she was forced to make. The waitress, feeling the intensity of the old woman's stare, instinctively touched the object, a subconscious gesture of protection. But it was too late. Beatrice had seen it. A sound escaped her, a sharp, ragged gasp that was utterly alien to the refined acoustics of Aurelia. Her manicured hand, adorned with a diamond the size of a robin's egg, flew to her throat. Her eyes, wide with disbelief and a grief so ancient it felt geological, began to well with tears. Hot, unstoppable tears that cut clean paths through the perfect foundation on her cheeks, dismantling the mask of composure she had worn for a lifetime. "That compass," she whispered, her voice a tremor, her finger rising with a shakiness that belied her iron-willed reputation. "Where did you get that compass?" The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to evaporate. Diners at nearby tables paused, forks halfway to their mouths. Arthur stared, utterly dumbfounded, at his mother's unprecedented collapse. The young waitress, whose name tag read Clara, looked from the weeping billionaire to the strange object at her neck, her face a canvas of pure confusion and alarm. Beatrice Sterling, the iron matriarch of a financial dynasty, a woman who had faced down hostile takeovers and buried a husband without shedding a public tear, was crying. Not with quiet, dignified sorrow, but with the raw, heart-shattering anguish of a long-dead star that had just impossibly flared back to life. The disturbance at table 12 sent a ripple of controlled panic through Aurelia's staff. The maître d', a polished man named Antoine who considered himself a conductor of perfection, glided over, his face a mask of professional empathy. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Mrs. Sterling?" he inquired, his voice a low, placating hum. Arthur, recovering from his shock, seized control. "My mother is feeling faint, a momentary indisposition. We are fine." He shot a sharp, irritated glare at the waitress. "Clara, you may go." But Beatrice's hand shot out, her grip surprisingly powerful as it closed around Clara's wrist. "No, stay," she pleaded, her voice thick with unshed tears. "That object, I must know, please." Clara stood frozen, a doe caught in the blinding headlights of unimaginable wealth and inexplicable emotion. She was acutely aware of the full attention of the room, of her slightly worn shoes, of the chasm that separated her world from that of the woman gripping her arm. It was my mother's," Clara stammered, her voice barely audible. "She gave it to me when I was little." "Your mother?" Beatrice's eyes searched Clara's face, desperately seeking a familiar feature, a ghost of a resemblance, anything. "What is her name? Where is she now?" Arthur intervened again, his tone hardening. "Mother, this is neither the time nor the place. You are creating a spectacle." He tried to pry his mother's fingers from Clara's arm. "My apology," he said to the young woman, his voice laced with condescension. "My mother is tired. She has mistaken your necklace for something else." He pulled a sleek, black card holder from his jacket. "For your trouble." He attempted to press a fan of crisp $100 bills into her hand. Clara recoiled as if the money were a hot coal. "No, thank you, sir. It's all right." Her eyes darted back to Beatrice, who was now weeping silently, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. There was a pain in the older woman's eyes so genuine it transcended class and circumstance. It was the universal agony of a heartbreaking. "Please," Beatrice said again, her voice regaining a sliver of its customary authority, though it was frayed with emotion. I will buy it from you. Name your price. $20,000. 50. Clara's eyes widened. $50,000. It was more than she earned in 2 years of working 2 jobs. It was enough to pay for the next 6 months of her mother's specialized care, to fix the ancient plumbing in their tiny apartment, to have one single moment where she wasn't gasping for financial air. A wave of temptation, so potent it made her dizzy, washed over her. She could solve so many problems. She instinctively clutched the compass. Its metal was cool against her warm skin, a familiar, solid weight she had known her entire life. It was the only thing she had from her mother that felt truly her own. Her mother, Eleanor, was sick, her mind a beautiful, intricate tapestry, slowly being unraveled by a cruel disease. But in her rare moments of lucidity, she would sometimes touch the compass. The boy who charted the stars made that, she would whisper, her voice frail. It holds your map. It'll always point you home. Clara had no idea what map it held. Her mother's past was a collection of fragmented, poetic phrases. She didn't know who her father was or where her mother had come from before arriving in Queens with a baby and a single suitcase. The compass was her only tangible link to that mystery, to the very foundation of her own identity. To sell it would be like selling her own history. I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling, Clara said, her voice finding a surprising strength. I can't. It's not for sale. Arthur scoffed, his disbelief palpable. Don't be absurd. It's a piece of junk metal. I'll write you a check for $100,000 right now. You can walk out of this restaurant and never work another shift in your life. The offer hung in the air, glittering, seductive, obscene. $100,000. A kingdom. But as Clara looked at Beatrice, she saw not a tycoon trying to acquire an asset, but a woman desperately trying to reclaim a piece of herself. And Clara, who had so little of her own past to hold on to, understood that desperation with every fiber of her being. No, she said more firmly this time. My answer is no. I'm very sorry for your distress. She gave a slight formal nod. If you'll excuse me, my other tables are waiting. With that, she turned and walked away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could feel the stares of every patron, hear the sibilant whispers. She fled to the chaotic sanctuary of the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly she had to brace them against a stainless steel counter to keep from dropping her tray. Back at the table, Arthur was incandescent. The audacity! She's playing you, Mother. It's a shakedown. She'll be back tomorrow with some bottom-feeding lawyer demanding $1 million. But Beatrice wasn't listening. Her gaze was fixed on the kitchen door through which Clara had vanished. The girl's refusal hadn't angered her. It had confirmed everything. An opportunist would have taken the money. An opportunist would have negotiated. Only someone who understood its true, non-monetary value would have refused. The girl cherished it, just as she was meant to. Find out about her, Arthur, Beatrice said, her voice low and resolute, the tears replaced by a chillingly clear determination. Her full name, her address, everything. What on earth are you going to do? Arthur asked, bewildered by the sudden shift. Beatrice dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin, her composure reassembling itself piece by piece like intricate armor. If she won't sell me a memory, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, then I shall have to purchase her entire history. The next morning, the sterile silence of Beatrice Sterling's penthouse, a glass-walled area overlooking Central Park, was broken by the arrival of a man named Finch. Finch was a private investigator of the old school, discreet, thorough, and utterly invisible. His nondescript appearance was a carefully cultivated camouflage for a mind that could untangle the most knotted of human secrets. Beatrice, draped in a silk robe the color of cream, sat opposite him in her sun-drenched living room. The emotional tempest of the previous night had receded, leaving behind a stark, obsessive focus. I want everything, Beatrice stated, her voice stripped of its earlier fragility. Clara Novak, she works at Aurelia, where she lives, her family, her financial situation. I want to know every bill she pays and every dollar she owes. But you will be a ghost, Mr. Finch. She is not to know she's being watched. Understood, Mrs. Sterling, Finch said, making brief notes in a small worn leather book. Arthur, who had been listening from the archway of the dining room, strode in. This is madness, Mother. You're spending a small fortune investigating a waitress. If you want that trinket, our legal team can draft an offer that makes it clear refusal is not an option. We can claim it's a stolen family artifact and bury her in litigation. It wasn't stolen, Beatrice snapped, her gaze as sharp as broken glass. And this is no longer about the object. It's about the girl. There was something in her eyes, Arthur. A strength, a dignity, and she refused your money. That is not the behavior of a common grifter. It's the behavior of an uncommonly clever one, Arthur countered. She knows she has you hooked. She's waiting for the price to go up. Beatrice fell silent, her gaze drifting to a small, unassuming bookshelf nestled between a towering modern sculpture and a priceless Rothko. It was out of place, filled with old, leather-bound volumes on astronomy and physics. Arthur had always dismissed it as a relic of his mother's eccentricities. For Beatrice, it was a shrine. While Finch gathered his instructions and departed, Beatrice walked to the bookshelf. Her fingers, cool and steady, traced the spine of a book titled Celestial Mechanics. She pulled it from the shelf. Tucked within its pages was a faded black-and-white photograph, its edges softened by time. It showed a much younger Beatrice, her hair long and wild, her smile unburdened by the weight of a dynasty. Her arm was linked with a young man whose eyes held an intensity that seemed to burn through the paper. He wore a simple, worn shirt, and his hands, though clean, looked capable and clever. His name was Leo Asimov. The compass had not been a gift from her late husband, Edward. Edward had given her diamonds, sapphires, entire city blocks. He had given her a life of unparalleled luxury and ironclad security. But he had never made her feel like the center of the universe. The compass was from Leo. He had been a graduate student in astrophysics at Columbia, a brilliant, penniless visionary who saw the cosmos not in numbers, but in poetry. Beatrice, then a 17-year-old heiress, suffocating under the thumb of her titan of industry father, had met him during a lecture she'd snuck into. Their love affair was a supernova, brief, brilliant, secret, and destined to collapse. Her father would never have countenanced a match with a penniless academic, a boy with nothing to his name but a galaxy in his eyes. Leo had crafted the compass himself in the university's metalworking shop using scraps of silver and brass. He'd cut the gears and etched the constellations by hand. The tiny quartz at the center, he'd told her, was a piece of a meteorite he'd acquired from a collector. "It's fallen from heaven," he'd said, his voice full of a sincerity that Edward, for all his power, could never replicate. "Just like you." Their love had a consequence, a baby, a daughter. The memory still had the power to hollow her out. Her father's fury had been a cold, silent, crushing force. He had orchestrated everything with brutal efficiency. She was sent away to a discreet clinic upstate. Leo was threatened, his academic career held hostage, his family intimidated. He was told to disappear, and he had vanished from her life like a ghost. He had tried to fight, but a poor student was no match for the Sterling family's power. Beatrice was permitted to hold her baby for only 5 minutes, a perfect, beautiful girl with a dusting of dark hair. Before the agency nurse took her away, Beatrice had pressed the celestial compass into the infant's swaddling clothes, a desperate, silent promise that she would one day find her. She had named her Celeste. Her father had covered his tracks masterfully. The adoption was sealed, anonymous, ironclad. By the time Beatrice was free of her family's control, married to the powerful and respectable Edward Sterling, an escape, not a romance, all trails to her daughter had gone cold. She had hired investigators over the years, but they always hit the same sealed, unbreachable wall. Eventually, the acute agony had faded into a chronic, dull ache, the ghost of a limb she learned to live without. Until last night. Seeing that compass had ripped the 60-year-old scar wide open. Could it be a copy? A coincidence? No. Her soul knew it was the one, which meant that the waitress, Clara Novak, was inexplicably, impossibly connected to her lost Celeste. The intercom buzzed, pulling her from the past. "Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Finch is on the line. He says he has some initial information of significant interest." Beatrice's hand trembled as she lifted the receiver. "Yes? Mrs. Sterling," Finch's voice was crisp. Clara Novak lives at 27B Orchard Lane in Astoria, Queens. She's the sole caregiver for her mother, Eleanor Novak. I'm digging into Eleanor now, but the interesting part is financial. They're in substantial medical debt. Miss Novak works the dinner shift at Aurelia and a breakfast and lunch shift at a diner called the Morning Star Cafe. Eleanor Novak's condition appears to be a degenerative neurological disorder. The bills are astronomical. Beatrice sank into a chair. The girl wasn't a clever opportunist. She was drowning. She had refused $100,000, a sum that would have been a lifeboat, out of pure, unassailable sentiment. "Thank you, Mr. Finch," Beatrice said, her voice strained. "Keep digging. I want to know everything about Eleanor Novak's origins." She hung up, her mind racing. Eleanor. The name meant nothing, but the girl's quiet dignity, her poverty, her fierce protection of that compass, it was all forming a picture, one that was equal parts terrifying and incandescent, with a hope she had long ago pronounced dead. Arthur Sterling did not share his mother's sentimental curiosity. He saw a problem that was metastasizing, a waitress who had somehow bewitched his mother and was now causing her to act irrationally. The solution, as always, was the application of overwhelming force. Bypassing his mother, who he believed was slipping into a state of emotional vulnerability unbecoming of her station, Arthur had his own corporate security team, men far less gentle than Finch, run a deep dive on Clara Novak. The results were the same, but Arthur's interpretation was starkly different. He saw not a struggling daughter, but a set of levers. Debt, a sick parent, a fragile existence, levers waiting to be pulled. 2 days after the incident at Aurelia, Clara was wiping down the counter at the Morning Star Cafe. It was a world away from Aurelia's opulence, a place of cracked vinyl booths and the lingering smell of coffee and bacon grease. Her feet ached, and all she wanted was to go home, check on her mother, and try to forget the look in Beatrice Sterling's eyes. As she stepped out into the crisp autumn afternoon, a severe black sedan slid to the curb. A man in a suit, not Arthur, but clearly cut from the same expensive cloth, emerged. "Miss Novak," he said, his tone polite but unyielding. "Mr. Arthur Sterling would like to speak with you." Clara's heart plummeted. "I'm sorry, I have to get home to my mother." "It will only take a moment," the man insisted, holding the rear door open. It was an invitation that felt like a summons. Resigned, Clara slid into the cool leather interior. Arthur Sterling sat opposite her, a laptop glowing on his knees. He deliberately ignored her for a full minute, a petty display of power that made her feel like an insect under a microscope. "Miss Novak," he finally said, closing the laptop with a soft click, "let's dispense with the theatrics. My mother has formed an unhealthy attachment to your necklace. I want it." "I already told your mother it isn't for sale," Clara said, her hands twisting the strap of her worn bag. "Everything is for sale," Arthur countered smoothly. "You're just a poor negotiator. Refusing the initial offer to drive up the price was a bold move. I'll grant you that, but the game is over." He slid a thick manila envelope across the seat. Inside is a cashier's check for $150,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. You sign the paper, you give me the compass, and you never contact my mother or any member of my family again. You will also, of course, resign your position at Aurelia. Immediately. Clara stared at the envelope. The number was dizzying, but the cold, transactional nature of it, the utter dismissal of any human feeling, felt like an assault. "It isn't about the money. It has sentimental value." Arthur let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sentimental value doesn't pay for the neurologist at Mount Sinai, does it? Or cover the experimental drug regimen for corticobasal degeneration? We know about your mother, Eleanor. We know about the collection agencies. We know that her caseworker, a Mrs. Gable, is considering recommending a move to a state-run facility because you can no longer afford the level of care she requires." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. They had strip-mined her life, weaponizing her most private pains. It felt obscene, a violation of the deepest order. "How dare you?" she whispered, fury and fear warring within her. "This is not a threat, Miss Novak. It is a statement of fact," Arthur said, his voice as cold as the November air. "I am offering you a lifeline. That money can secure the absolute best care for your mother. It can give you a life free from the constant terror of debt, all for a piece of metal. It is the logical, practical choice. He was twisting the knife, pitting her love for her mother against her connection to her past. He was making her feel selfish for holding on to the one object that gave her a sense of belonging. Tears welled, hot and angry, but she forced them back. She would not give him the satisfaction. She thought of her mother, of the fear in her eyes on bad days, and the beautiful, fleeting moments of clarity. The compass was part of that story, part of her. The answer is still no, Clara said, her voice trembling but unbroken. What you are doing is disgusting. Please, just leave me alone. Arthur's face hardened, the veneer of corporate civility evaporating to reveal raw, undisguised contempt. Fine, but understand this. My family owns half the buildings on your block. Landlords can be persuaded, employers can be reminded of the value of discretion. You are a mayfly, Miss Novak. I strongly suggest you stop buzzing before you get swatted. The threat was unambiguous, suffocating. The driver opened her door. Clara scrambled out of the car, her legs unsteady. The sedan sped away, leaving her on the sidewalk, shaking with a terror so profound it was nauseating. She ran home, bursting into their small apartment. Her mother, Eleanor, was sitting by the window, a rare look of lucidity in her eyes. Clara, darling, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. Clara collapsed onto the worn sofa, the tears finally coming in a torrent. She told her mother everything. The old woman at the restaurant, the son, the money, the threats. Eleanor listened, her expression growing sad. She reached out, her hand cool and frail on Clara's. Her eyes went to the compass. They want it that badly, Eleanor murmured, more to herself than to Clara. I don't understand why, Clara sobbed. Why is it so important to them? Eleanor's gaze grew distant, her mind retrieving a fragment from the fog. The boy who charted the stars. He made it for the girl with winter eyes, she whispered. He said the sky held the key, the North Star, on the day she was born. It points the way. Clara frowned, confused. What, Mom? What key? Who was born? But the window of clarity had closed. Eleanor's eyes glazed over. She smiled vaguely and began humming a tune from a half-forgotten lullaby. Clara's heart ached. The cryptic words were just another piece of the puzzle, a puzzle that was becoming more complex and dangerous with every passing day. She clutched the compass. It was no longer just a keepsake. It was the heart of a storm, and she was standing directly in its eye. When Beatrice learned from a distraught Antoine that Clara had been summarily dismissed from Aurelia at Arthur's command, her fury was volcanic. She summoned her son to her penthouse. For the first time in his adult life, he saw not a placid, aging mother, but the formidable woman who had stood shoulder to shoulder with his father as he built an empire. How dare you, she demanded, her voice a low, dangerous rumble. How dare you use the power of this family to terrorize a young woman who has done nothing but work for an honest wage? You threatened her. You had her fired. I was protecting you, Arthur retorted, standing his ground. You were becoming obsessed, emotional. She's a nobody, a grifter looking for a payday. I solved the problem. You are the problem, Arthur, Beatrice said, her disappointment a physical force in the room. You see the world as a balance sheet. You see people as assets or liabilities. You have your father's business acumen, but you have none of his soul. Leave, I will handle this, and you will stay away from Clara Novak. After Arthur left, his face a thunderous mask of indignation, Beatrice felt a loneliness so profound it was a physical weight. Her own son was a stranger, a man so thoroughly molded by the wealth she now found so meaningless. She called Finch. I'm changing the parameters of the investigation, she said. I don't care about Clara Novak's finances anymore. I want her mother's history, Eleanor Novak. Find her birth certificate. I want to know where and when she was born. Then I want you to get a court order. I don't care what it costs or who you have to persuade, and unseal the adoption records for that county for that year. Cross-reference everything. It was a wild, desperate gamble, a Hail Mary pass across 60 years, based on nothing more than a gut feeling and a tarnished metal sphere. While Finch's team began the Herculean task of sifting through decades of sealed archives, Beatrice retreated into her own past. She unlocked a safe hidden behind a painting and removed a small, leather-bound box. Inside were the few relics she had kept from her time with Leo. A few letters written in his elegant script, filled with dreams of them mapping undiscovered galaxies together. A charcoal sketch he had done of her, capturing a light in her eyes that Edward had never seen. And at the bottom, a small velvet pouch containing a single earring, a tiny silver star with a sliver of meteorite at its center. It was the matching piece to the compass. Leo had kept the other, a promise that they would find each other again. A promise his fate and her father had prevented him from keeping. She clutched the earring, its sharp points digging into her palm. The memories were agonizingly vivid. The sterile white room, the condescending pity of the nurses, the crushing weight of her father's decision, presented as an immutable fact of life. It's for the best, Beatrice. The child will have a proper family. You will forget. You will move on. But she had never forgotten, not for one day. The ghost of Celeste had haunted the periphery of her life, a constant, silent question mark. Days bled into a week. Beatrice existed on coffee and memory, waiting. Then the call came. Mrs. Sterling. Finch's voice was different. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by something bordering on awe. We found it. It took calling in every favor I've accrued over 30 years and a very friendly judge. But we got the original file unsealed. Beatrice held her breath, her knuckles white on the receiver. Eleanor Novak was born on October 26, 1973, at the St. Jude's Home for Young Mothers in Putnam County, Finch said. She was placed for adoption one day later. Her birth mother is listed on the original sealed certificate. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. The name on the certificate is Beatrice Sterling. The world dissolved. The air rushed from Beatrice's lungs in a silent scream. It was true. It wasn't a delusion born of grief. It was real. Eleanor Novak was her Celeste. The waitress, the quiet, resilient young woman named Clara, was her granddaughter. Mrs. Sterling, are you still there? Finch's voice was gentle. Yes, Beatrice whispered, tears blurring the glittering Manhattan skyline into a watercolor wash of gray and gold. Yes, I'm here. A lifetime of grief, regret, and longing crested within her, not as a wave of sorrow, but as a tidal wave of impossible, earth-shattering joy. She had found her. After 60 years, a waitress in a restaurant had unknowingly brought her daughter home. There's more, Finch said softly. I looked into Eleanor's adoptive parents, good working-class people, both deceased. She had a difficult life, and there's no record of Clara's father. The birth certificate lists him as unknown. It explained everything. The hardship, the struggle. Her daughter had lived a world away from the gilded cage Beatrice inhabited, and now she was sick, her memory fading. The fierce, primal, maternal love Beatrice had been forced to suppress for 6 decades roared to life. She would not lose her daughter again, not now. Book the top neurologist in the world, Mr. Finch, Beatrice commanded, her voice ringing with an authority she hadn't felt in years. Dr. Eris Thorne at the Mayo Clinic. Fly him to New York on my jet. Reserve an entire wing at Mount Sinai if you have to. And get me an address. I'm going to see my granddaughter. For Clara, the world had become a prison of quiet anxieties. Arthur Sterling's threats were not idle. Her manager at the Morning Star Cafe had begun cutting her hours, citing non-existent budget issues. An eviction notice had appeared on her door, claiming violations of a lease clause she'd never seen before. She was being systematically squeezed, the invisible hand of the Sterling Empire tightening around her throat. One afternoon, as she was helping her mother with a puzzle, Eleanor's eyes cleared with that startling, heartbreaking lucidity. Clara, she said, her voice a thin thread, but clear. The compass. Let me see it. Surprised, Clara took it off and placed it in her mother's palm. Eleanor's frail fingers traced the celestial map, just as Beatrice's memories had. My mother gave this to me, Eleanor whispered. Not the woman who raised me, my birth mother. They said she was very young, and her family was very powerful. They made her give me away. Clara leaned in, her heart pounding. What else, Mom? What did they tell you? Just that she loved me, Eleanor said, a single tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. She left this. The nurse said my mother called me Celeste. She said the compass was a star to guide me. Her voice trailed off. There's a secret inside. Did you ever look? Clara's breath hitched. She had tried to open it 1,000 times as a child, but it was sealed shut. It's jammed, Mom. It doesn't open. There's a trick, Eleanor murmured, her eyelids fluttering. A key, in the sky, the North Star, on the day she was born. The day she was born. The phrase echoed in Clara's mind. She gently took the compass. It had dials like a combination lock. She had always assumed they were decorative. A key in the sky. A date. She scrambled to find the small box where she kept her mother's documents. She found it, an old yellowed birth certificate. Eleanor Vance, born October 26, 1973. Her hands trembling, she pulled out her phone and searched. Position of Polaris, October 26, 1973. The coordinates came up, azimuth and altitude. She looked at the dials on the compass. They were marked in degrees. With painstaking precision, using her watchmaker's tools to gently turn the stiff, 60-year-old dials, she set them to the exact coordinates of the North Star on the night her mother was born. There was a faint metallic click. The sphere sprang open. Clara gasped. Tucked into the two halves were two tiny, perfectly preserved secrets. On one side, protected by a sliver of quartz, was a minuscule, faded photograph of a young woman with a radiant smile and eyes the color of a winter sky. The woman from the restaurant, Beatrice Sterling, but decades younger. On the other side, etched into the silver in an elegant, looping script, were 5 words. For Celeste, your lodestar. Find me. Celeste, her mother's birth name, and the elegant script matched the signature on a check Clara had once seen in a magazine profile of the Sterling family. The realization crashed over her. The obsession with the compass, the tears, the offers of money. It wasn't about an object. It was about a person. It was about her mother. Her mother was Celeste. In the Billionaire, Beatrice Sterling was her grandmother. Just as this world-altering truth settled, there was a soft knock on the apartment door. Clara's first instinct was terror. Arthur's men come to throw them on the street. She opened it a crack. Standing in the dim hallway was Beatrice Sterling. She was not the imperious matriarch from Aurelia. She was dressed simply in a wool coat and slacks. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a raw, nervous, hopeful vulnerability. She was alone. Clara, Beatrice said, her voice soft, may I please come in? I need to speak with you. And with your mother. Speechless, Clara could only nod, stepping back to let the woman into her small, cluttered home. Beatrice's eyes took in the worn furniture, the stack of medical bills, the grinding reality of their struggle. Her gaze filled with a profound, soul-deep regret. Her eyes finally landed on Eleanor, now lost in her own world again. Beatrice took a hesitant step forward. Celeste, she whispered, the name a breath of air, a prayer she hadn't dared speak aloud for 60 years. Clara held up the open compass. She told me, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. Just now, she remembered. Beatrice looked from the compass in Clara's hand to the face of her daughter, then back to the face of her granddaughter. The resemblance was undeniable. The same determined set of the jaw, the same strength in the eyes. Tears streamed down Beatrice's face once more. But this time, they were not tears of grief. They were tears of homecoming. I found you, Beatrice breathed, her voice breaking. Oh, my darling girl, after all this time, I finally found you. She reached out, not for the compass, but for Clara's hand. Her touch was gentle and warm. The chasm between the Billionaire and the Waitress vanished, erased by a truth that had been guided by the stars for 60 years. The air in the small apartment was thick with the weight of unspoken history, a sacred space where 60 years of silence had finally found a voice. Beatrice knelt by Eleanor's chair, her fingers, which had signed billion-dollar deals, now trembling as they gently stroked the hair of the daughter she had only ever held in memory. She whispered the name Celeste like a mantra, as if the sound itself could mend the fractured decades. For a brief, miraculous moment, Eleanor's clouded eyes seemed to focus, and a flicker of recognition, of deep, instinctual comfort, crossed her face as she leaned into the touch. Clara stood by, the open compass still warm in her hand. Her world had been redrawn. She was no longer just Clara Novak, exhausted waitress. She was the granddaughter of Beatrice Sterling, the living link between a secret past and an unimaginable future. The revelation was a dizzying cocktail of shock, relief, and a profound sorrow for the life her mother, Celeste, might have had. This fragile, holy moment was shattered by the sound of heavy, purposeful footsteps in the hallway, followed by a sharp, authoritative rap on the door that was less a knock and more a demand. Before Clara could react, the door was pushed open with enough force to bang against the wall. Arthur Sterling stood on the threshold, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He was flanked by two broad-shouldered men in dark, severe suits. Their presence was like a drop in barometric pressure, instantly chilling the room. They were not bodyguards. They were instruments of corporate will, men who solved problems with quiet, implacable efficiency. Arthur's gaze swept across the scene with unconcealed contempt. His mother kneeling on the floor of this squalid apartment, the sick woman in the chair, and Clara, whom he saw as the architect of this entire charade. "I knew it," he spat, the words slicing through the room as he strode forward, his expensive shoes scuffing the worn linoleum. "I knew you were a predator. It's a masterful performance. I'll give you that. You find a lonely, vulnerable old woman, dig up some obscure detail about her past, and weave this elaborate, pathetic fantasy to fleece her." He stopped directly in front of Clara, his height and anger creating an intimidating shadow. How much did it take to convince her? 1 million? 2? What's the going rate for a fabricated family history these days? Clara shrank back, but a spark of defiance ignited within her. "You don't understand," she began, her voice a whisper. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Arthur interrupted, his voice dangerously low. "I understand that my mother is unwell, and you are a parasite who has latched onto this family's wealth. Well, the game is over." He turned to Beatrice. "Mother, we are leaving. Now. These men will handle this transaction. They will retrieve your property and ensure Miss Novak understands the legal consequences of extortion." He gave a sharp nod to one of the men, who took a step toward Clara, his hand outstretched for the compass. "They will do no such thing, Arthur." Beatrice's voice cut through the air like a shard of ice. She rose to her feet with a fluid grace that defied her age, planting herself firmly between Arthur's man and Clara. She was no longer the weeping woman from the restaurant or the remorseful mother. She was Beatrice Sterling, the matriarch, and her eyes blazed with a protective fire Arthur had never witnessed. "This is not a transaction," she declared, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "And this," she said, gesturing to Clara, "is not a parasite. This is my granddaughter, Amelia Clara Novak. And this woman," her voice broke with 60 years of pent-up emotion as she pointed to Eleanor, "is my daughter Celeste." Arthur let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Daughter? Granddaughter? Mother, listen to yourself. You're not thinking clearly. This grifter has poisoned your mind. You have never in my entire life mentioned a lost daughter, because I was made to feel ashamed." Beatrice's voice boomed, startling them all with its power. "Because my parents, your grandparents, decided that the family name was more important than a baby girl. They cared more for appearances and their social standing than for their own child's heart. I was 17, Arthur, a scared girl in love with a man they deemed unsuitable, and they tore my life apart. They sent me away, they took my baby, and they threatened the man I loved until he vanished forever. They told me to forget, to move on, to bury the shame. And for 60 years I have lived with that ghost." She took a step closer to her son, her gaze unwavering and fierce. "You are just like them. You see a problem, and you throw money or threats at it. You cannot fathom that something's value could be anything other than monetary. You look at Clara and you see a poor waitress. I look at her, and I see a young woman with more integrity and love in her heart than you have ever shown." The words struck Arthur like physical blows. "I offered her a fortune, Arthur. Your fortune. A life-changing sum of money that could have solved every single one of her problems. And she refused. She refused because this compass, my compass, the one I placed in my daughter's blanket, meant more to her than all the money in the world." Beatrice's gaze was relentless. "You tried to destroy her. You had her fired. You threatened her housing. You used the full weight of the Sterling name to crush a girl who had nothing. And still, she protected her mother's only keepsake. She protected my daughter's legacy without even knowing what it was." A thick, heavy silence descended. Arthur stared at his mother, the absolute conviction in her voice shaking the very foundations of his reality. Clara, emboldened by Beatrice's ferocious defense, held up her hand, the compass open in her palm. The light from the window caught the tiny, faded photograph of the young, smiling Beatrice. Arthur's eyes were drawn to it, to the undeniable proof. He saw the face of his mother before she was his mother, a girl filled with a light he had never known. He saw the inscription, "For Celeste, your lodestar. Find me." His carefully ordered world, a world of spreadsheets and market values, of clear wins and quantifiable losses, fractured. The cold logic that had been his armor for so long shattered against the irrefutable truth of this emotional, messy, human story. He looked from the compass to Clara, and for the first time, he didn't see a grifter. He saw a young woman with his mother's eyes. He looked at the frail, sick woman in the chair and saw not a prop in a scam, but his aunt, a member of his family who had lived a life of hardship while he had lived one of unimaginable privilege. The magnitude of the family's secret, of the profound injustice, hit him with the force of a physical blow. His entire identity was built on a lie of omission. The fury drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly pallor. The arrogance in his posture collapsed, leaving him looking suddenly younger, smaller, and utterly lost. He started, but no words came. What could he say? He had been monstrous. He had wielded his power with casual cruelty, all in the name of a truth that was utterly false. Shame, a foreign and corrosive emotion, burned in his gut. He couldn't bear to look at his mother's disappointed face or at the quiet dignity of the girl he had tried to break. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked stiffly out of the apartment. He brushed past his bewildered men, leaving them standing in the doorway. "Go!" Beatrice commanded them, her voice quiet but firm. They glanced at each other, then retreated, closing the door softly behind them, sealing the new family within the quiet walls of the apartment. The storm had passed. In the ensuing silence, Clara finally let out a shuddering breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Beatrice came to her, taking both the compass and Clara's hand into her own. "He will come around," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Or he won't. Right now it doesn't matter. What matters is us." With a newfound, singular purpose, Beatrice pulled out her phone. Her voice, as she made the call, was the calm, commanding force that Clara now understood could move mountains. "This is Beatrice Sterling. I need Dr. Eris Thorne. I don't care what his schedule is. My jet is on the tarmac at Teterboro. I want him in New York City by morning, ready to see a patient. Yes, cost is no object. Make it happen." She hung up and turned to Clara, her eyes soft with a lifetime of unshed tears. "Your mother will have the best care in the world. You will have a home, a real home. You will never have to work another shift again unless you choose to. You can go to school, travel, do anything you dream of. The world is yours now, Clara." Clara could only shake her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Beatrice said gently. She looked down at the compass, tracing the celestial map with her finger. "Your grandfather made this," she whispered, giving Clara the final piece of her story. "His name was Leo. He was a brilliant astronomer, and he had the kindest soul I have ever known. He would have loved you so fiercely." Beatrice looked over at Eleanor, at Celeste, who had drifted into a peaceful sleep in her chair, a faint smile on her lips. A real family. After a lifetime of loneliness in palaces of glass and steel, Beatrice had finally found her home in a cramped two-room apartment with a daughter lost to time and a granddaughter she never knew she had. The sterling fortune of stocks and bonds and real estate was vast, but it was nothing compared to this. This was the real inheritance. This was the inheritance of the stars.